Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, February 12th, over here at the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
I think it's February 12th everywhere, Moshe.
Yes, here at the podcast and everywhere else around the world.
Well, I guess it depends where you're listening and when. I'm Jill Wagner, though. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
And Moshe, we quickly wanted to mention some news at the beginning of this podcast that directly impacts us here at Mo News. If you listen to this podcast, you know that Shopify is one of our sponsors, but we have decided to pause our agreement with them, at least temporarily.
Yeah, upon learning that Shopify was hosting the Kanye West website, some of you may have seen that Super Bowl ad, learned over the course of the past 36 hours or so that he was selling a swastika t-shirt with the code Heil Hitler. They happened to be hosting that website. We didn't hear from them on Monday, so paused the ad yesterday. They have since taken down the website on Tuesday, saying all merchants are responsible for following the rules of our platform. The merchant did not engage in authentic commerce practices and violated our terms, so we removed them. We are still seeking more clarity, though, on their hate speech and anti-Semitism policies. So we tried to move as quickly as possible. We were hearing from a number of you on Monday throughout the day saying, hey, with this Shopify story, what are you guys doing about it on the podcast? So we tried to make moves as quickly as possible. We stand firmly against anti-Semitism and hate speech, believe all platforms that advertise here and that we work with should do the same. So we'll continue to keep all of you up to date on those conversations, but wanted to be fully transparent with all of you because you trust us for the news. And so sometimes various stories will impact us directly here at Mo News.
All right, let's get to the headlines now. As President Trump meets with Jordan's King Abdullah at the White House, the latest headlines from the Middle East. Then when it comes to Ukraine, Donald Trump says the U.S. can access $500 billion in rare earth materials in exchange for U.S. help during the war.
Yeah, Trump, as the war heads into a fourth year here, is saying, Ukraine, in order to continue to get aid from us, you need to give us something in exchange. We'll dive into that.
And then to Russia, American Marc Fogel has been released from custody.
This was the teacher we've told you about who's been in a Russian prison for a number of years.
And back to American politics, federal prosecutors told to drop charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams.
And what Adams is saying.
The Super Bowl super ratings. How many people watched the big game, even though it was a blowout?
A lot of people, Jill.
But did they watch until the fourth quarter?
We'll break down the numbers.
Moshe, your favorite topic. The FBI says it's discovered new files on the JFK assassination.
The headline is great. We're still waiting on some details here, Jill.
Yeah, we need to know what the files say.
Yes.
Okay. And Americans saying adios to Europe. We'll tell you what is driving Americans away. And just in time for Valentine's Day, get ready to pay more for chocolate, of all things.
It's going to be a little pricier this year for that box of chocolates, depending on what brand you're buying.
And Moshe has on this day in history.
Decided to keep the Abraham Lincoln theme going after yesterday's Penny story. So big day in history for Honest Abe.
Okay, let's start with a slew of international headlines, starting with President Trump meeting on Tuesday with King Abdullah of Jordan at the White House. And Moshe, a ton of news being made per usual. For one, the president doubled down on this new 12 p.m. Saturday deadline for Hamas to return all of the remaining hostages, or else, his words, all hell is going to break out. As we reported yesterday, it follows Hamas saying that it was not going to release 3 additional hostages on Saturday as agreed to under the ceasefire deal, saying that Israel was violating that deal, but not providing any details. On Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would resume intense fighting in Gaza if Hamas does not release, quote, our hostages by that deadline.
Like, it's still unclear. There's Israeli officials talking on background that they mean the 9 who are still believed to be alive in this phase. There's 17 overall set to be returned in this phase. Trump is saying 76. So if you kind of want to just go through those numbers, it's being left relatively vague. Netanyahu referred to our hostages. So the deal said 3 on Saturday. There are 9 alive, which some people are saying that's what he means. There's 17 overall in this phase, and there's 76 remaining.
So it's not exactly clear what Netanyahu is referring to or how many hostages he is referring to. Trump is implying that Hamas needs to release all 76 hostages that are still in Gaza. It appears the Israeli prime minister, likely referring just to the ceasefire hostage deal that was agreed upon, and that he expects Hamas to release at least 3 of the Israeli hostages, as again was agreed to in this current deal.
Yeah, so there's 76 overall still there. In phase 1, 33 were set to be released, 17 of which have not been released. Of those 17, 9 are still alive. So there's some Israeli officials saying on background, Netanyahu expects all 9 of them, the ones who are still living, to be released, and then the bodies of those who are dead afterwards. Again, Trump is saying all 76. So unclear here. The deal was for 3 additional ones. Hamas paused the deal, and now you have both Trump and Netanyahu threatening that the war will resume, or in Trump's words, all hell will break loose if they don't abide by that deal.
Okay, back to President Trump's meeting with the King of Jordan. Trump also doubling down on the U.S. taking over Gaza and rebuilding it. He was asked again how that would work. Would the U.S. buy the territory or just take it over? So listen to a little bit of this with the president yesterday.
We're going to have Gaza. We don't have to buy. There's nothing to buy. We will have Gaza.
What does that mean?
No reason to buy. There is nothing to buy. It's Gaza. It's a war-torn area. We're going to take it. We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to get it going eventually, where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the people in the Middle East. It's going to be for the people in the Middle East, but I think it can be a diamond. It can be an absolute tremendous asset for the Middle East.
Pretty remarkable words here. You're not accustomed to hearing a president say, literally, we're going to go take this piece of land. We're going to build on it. The King of Jordan sitting next to him, trying to be super stone-faced of all this. He doesn't like Trump's plan. His people are vehemently against it. But in person, he wasn't going to criticize it, at least not on camera.
Yeah, a reporter asked Trump while sitting next to King Abdullah how he was going to get Jordan to take in the Palestinians when Jordan has said it doesn't want to. And then Trump basically threw it over to King Abdullah, who gave what I think we would call word salad, Moshe.
Trying to navigate it very, very diplomatically without really saying anything at all.
He did make a bit of news. He said Jordan would take in about 2,000 Palestinian children from Gaza who are in need of medical care, including kids who have cancer. Trump, though, is urging Jordan, which neighbors the West Bank, and Egypt, which neighbors Gaza, to accept more Palestinians from Gaza, given the lack of homes and just the destruction in the territory. The president saying that Egypt and Jordan should be 2 of the places that help find permanent homes for many of these Palestinians. Both countries not interested. During the meeting, King Abdullah did not directly comment on Trump's Gaza proposal while speaking in English. Instead, again, all he would say is that Arab countries are going to come forward with a plan and that they will work with the United States. After the meeting, though, he did put out a statement in Arabic intended for his population, claiming that he reaffirmed Jordan's firm stance against the displacement of Palestinians. Everyone's priority should be the reconstruction of Gaza without displacing its people. Jordan, by the way, relies on U.S. economic aid and military support. They get about $1.5 billion in U.S. aid every year, which accounts for about 3% of the country's GDP. But Moshe, the real issue for King Abdullah is the demographics of his country. It's already home to millions of Palestinians. It's estimated to be more than 50% of its population.
Yeah, they're actually not honest about how significant the population is because it's awkward. The King of Jordan, he's not democratically elected. He was put there, well, his grandfather was put there by the Brits nearly a century ago. And so he rules over a country. He happens to be from the Hashemite tribe of Arabia, and he rules over a country that is majority Palestinian. So the government there tries to minimize those numbers. Again, he depends as a monarch who doesn't go for election on the support of the people. So he's got to be very careful here. Also, there's a long history here of the Palestinian population within Jordan. His father was nearly assassinated as the Palestinian as a Palestinian Liberation Organization, tried to take out the government 50 years ago there, and has depended on the Israelis and the Americans, the family has, to stay in power for many years. Jordan's in a rough neighborhood. To the east, they got Iraq. To the north, they got Syria. They got ISIS roaming around. They got Al-Qaeda roaming around. They got the Iranians who want to take out the regime. They got Hamas. There's a number of groups that are not friendly to the Jordanian king. Who's giving him stability, support, aid? Well, that's America, and to a certain extent, the Israelis. He happens to be in a landlocked country in the desert there. So there's not much for him to do economically. So again, the aid is key there. And this Arabic statement versus the English statement, really interesting. And by the way, not the first time we're seeing this in the region. He was sitting there next to Trump. So you have to be very careful navigating that, especially as Trump has shown a proclivity to threaten aid and other things the U.S. has given to certain countries for many years, saying, hey, if you want to keep that, you got to do something for me. But then for his own people in Arabic, he puts out the statement saying, I told the president that his plan to displace the Palestinians, not acceptable. Now, part of the reason Trump has put out this plan, he didn't see anyone in the region stepping up for this situation. He said, I'm going to put this out there. You guys come up with a better plan if you think you have one. Now, Jordan also destabilized by the fact that they have more than 600,000 Syrian refugees among the millions in the region. And that's something the Americans have also said to the Arab world. You take in all these Syrian refugees, but you're unwilling to take in Palestinian refugees. Again, there's a long history there, both a number of countries and the population seeing the Palestinian population as potentially and historically destabilizing at times their countries. At the same time, also, given the popularity of the Palestinian cause on the Arab street, they don't want to concede the Palestinian issue or be seen as making it more difficult for the Palestinians to have a country. And so that creates a lot of anger among the populations, especially in all these countries where, again, these folks are not democratically elected. So we've seen a long history in the Middle East of rulers challenged, assassinated, taken out. And so that, again, is always a concern for a number of these leaders, including the current leaders of Egypt and Jordan. That said, Trump doubling down here, tripling down, quadrupling down, saying, I want you to find a permanent home here as I rebuild Gaza, make it a diamond for the region, for the people of the region. And again, we should say this is a non-starter for the Arab countries, at least publicly. They have to come up with some sort of alternative, as the president appears to be very serious on this issue. But Jill, to the point you brought up at the beginning, the thing we're really watching is that Saturday deadline, the red line that Trump has drawn here for Hamas, that the Israelis have drawn for Hamas, and what that means moving forward.
And given the horrible condition that we saw the last 3 hostages were in when they were released last week, families of some of these hostages that are still there are speaking out saying time is of the essence. We have to move forward with this deal. Yeah,
there's a lot of domestic pressure in Israel for this deal to continue through, even with Hamas showing this intransigence. And so they're calling the bluff here. And so these next few days will be very closely watched.
Okay, a lot of other international headlines as well. Donald Trump saying in an interview that Ukraine would need to give the U.S. $500 billion in rare earth minerals in exchange for continued aid, as this war now heads into a 4th year starting later this month. February 24th is the anniversary of Russia's 2022 full-scale invasion on Ukraine. The U.S. has sent $170 billion in aid since that invasion. Here is some of what Donald Trump said.
They may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have all this money in there, and I say I want it back.
The president said in a post on Truth Social Tuesday that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will meet with the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, and that Zelensky might be open to it. On Friday, he told Reuters that, quote, the Americans helped the most, and therefore the Americans should earn the most. Zelensky said he is ready to do a deal with the U.S. to develop the country's huge deposits of critical elements and minerals, which are used to produce technologies in exchange for assistance. Trump campaigned on ending the war in Ukraine in just 24 hours, but Putin has been putting up some roadblocks.
Well, it's interesting that the person he has sent to Ukraine, not the Secretary of Defense, not the Secretary of State, but the Secretary of the Treasury, Besant there, talking economics and this proposal. For Trump, everything is transactional. He doesn't just feel like America should give aid for aid's sake or for larger principles like democracy, freedom, fighting, the Russian invasion here. For him, he's like, well, what are you doing for me if I give this to you? And he's been very transparent about that. We should note Ukraine holds huge deposits of critical elements, minerals, lithium, titanium, vital to manufacturing modern technologies. That's what is referred to when we talk about rare earth metals. Ukraine also has coal reserves, major coal reserves, oil, gas, uranium, though notably a number of those reserves happen to be in territory right now that the Russians currently control. They control about 20% of the country. But certainly that comment from Trump that Ukraine may be Russia one day concerned a number of allies, NATO allies in Europe, concerned a number of Ukrainians, saying, what exactly are you saying here? I thought we were going to make some sort of deal to ensure the survival of Ukraine. But, that's sort of what Trump likes to call the weave, as he talks through various things, as he thinks through things, as he answers things, but ultimately not typical of presidents that try to be very careful about tone and word usage that we've seen in the past. Now, Trump was asked in that Fox interview, this is part of the Super Bowl interview, they aired more of it Monday on Fox, whether or how he's going to bring President Putin of Russia to the table. Trump quickly pivoted, saying, if I was in charge, this war would have never happened. And that was sort of his answer on all of that. He's made the same claim about October 7th and a number of things that happened during the Biden administration. Now, interestingly, we would find out later on Tuesday why he may have not been saying that much there. They were finalizing the deal to release an American who's been in Russian prison now for more than 3 years, Marc Fogel. He's the teacher we told you about, as there's been these various deals to release Americans like Brittany Griner, Evan Gershkovich, and others. Fogel was still in prison, and they couldn't make a deal there. The Russians had actually sentenced him to 14 years for possessing medical marijuana, and the U.S. officially designated him wrongfully detained last year, and they've been trying to make a deal. Well, Fogel returned to the U.S. yesterday, and they've made a deal. We don't know much about the deal besides that the Russians released him. The National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, saying that President Trump, Steve Witkoff, he's the Middle East envoy that Trump is now using for the Ukraine-Russia issue, and presidential advisors negotiated an exchange that serves as a show of good faith from the Russians and a sign we are moving in the right direction. Now, keyword there, exchange. What we don't know is who was exchanged for Marc Fogel? What was exchanged for Marc Fogel? Was it a prisoner or prisoners from other countries? Remember that 7-way exchange for Gershkovich and others? Was it someone from here in the U.S.? We don't know. The White House, at least as of this recording, is not commenting. And it underscores here, this exchange is really interesting because both Zelensky and Putin are trying to curry favor with Trump as he becomes the arbiter here of what will eventually be peace talks or, attempts to end the war here, ceasefire talks between Ukraine and Russia. And so Putin trying to earn a little love from Trump there, Zelensky trying to as well. But we'll stay tuned for, it's great to hear that Marc Fogel is now home to his family after 3.5 years in a Russian prison. But what the U.S. gave in exchange, still unclear.
I also think it is fascinating that it was Steve Witkoff who was there. I mean, it wasn't Marco Rubio. It wasn't any of these other people who are in diplomacy. Yeah, it was Steve Witkoff who clearly just knows how to get things done.
And Joe, I'll throw in Keith Kellogg. He's the military official who's actually been named the special envoy to Ukraine and Russia. And Trump liked what Witkoff was doing so much in the Middle East. He's like, you know what? I'm going to send you there too. Background on Witkoff, he's a golfing buddy of Trump's. He's a real estate developer. But Trump likes his negotiating style. And so ultimately here he's like, Witkoff, you're also going to handle that other major crisis and war in the region. And it was interesting, Jill, following on X, on social media, on Monday into Tuesday, people were like tracking, there's all these websites, you can track planes. And they're like, wait, there's an American plane landing in Moscow. Who's on that plane? Well, lo and behold, it turned out to be Steve Witkoff. But at the time people were tracking it. It was one of those mysteries that lasted a few hours there on social media.
The story that has stayed with me about Steve Witkoff is that apparently he was in the Middle East. He wanted to meet with Netanyahu on a Saturday, like in the morning on Saturday. And Netanyahu's like, I'll meet with you after Shabbat, which is Saturday.
Right.
Basically, it's sundown.
It's the Sabbath. I don't do work on the Sabbath. Yeah.
And Witkoff's like, I'll see you in the morning. Bye.
He's like, I'm not waiting till the end of the Sabbath. You're going to meet with me now.
Yada, yada, yada. There's a ceasefire.
Sounds very much like someone else we often talk about on this podcast.
Okay, time for the speed read from the New York Times. New York City Mayor Eric Adams celebrating yesterday, a day after he got news that the U.S. Justice Department is dropping criminal corruption charges against him. Adams said Tuesday in an address from City Hall that he is grateful to the DOJ for what he calls its honesty in its decision and maintained his innocence. He was initially indicted back in September on charges including bribery, wire fraud, and solicitation of a contribution by a foreign national. He called for moving on from the accusations to focus on representing the city that he leads. But he did recognize that trust in him has been shaken, especially as he faces re-election for a second term as mayor later this year. The memo from the Trump Justice Department directing the dismissal of the case does not assess the case's strength or say that he's innocent. Instead, it argues that it improperly interfered with Adams's 2025 re-election campaign and unduly restricted his ability to focus on illegal immigration and violent crime.
Yeah, just for background here, this stems from allegations for years that Adams had accepted and sought a variety of benefits and perks from wealthy foreign business people and Turkish government officials in exchange for favors, including approving of their consulate building in New York, despite concerns by the New York Fire Department that it wasn't safe. And so this indictment runs from 2014 to 2021. There were a number of details, including that he would fly to Paris via Istanbul, which is not the most convenient way to go. So a number of details there. The Justice Department felt they had them. In fact, they had already secured a couple guilty pleas from other individuals who were going to be testifying here against Adams. But the Trump Justice Department says he was indicted for criticizing Biden's immigration policy. They don't provide specific evidence for that. Now, we do know that Adams at times was critical of the Biden administration, so they accuse the DOJ of being politicized. Same thing that Trump alleges, and say you got to drop the case here. And it's notable that they find it that he criticized Biden's immigration policy, and then they go on to say, you know why we need to drop this case? Because we need Adams's help on our immigration policy in deporting all the migrants that are in New York. Now, we've been speculating for a while here as Adams has sort of curried favor with Trump. He went out to Mar-a-Lago. They had dinner. He's been praising him a lot. Now, Adams maintains that his decision to meet with Trump, to praise Trump, it's good for New York City. So he's going to keep doing it. Now, critics have said it's also good for your self-interest there, Eric Adams, as opposed to standing up for things that, the majority of New Yorkers, if you polled them, care about. So there's been a lot of back and forth here. DOJ drops it. The most interesting thing, Jill, this case isn't completely over. They've dropped it for now. They apparently hold out. The DOJ says they'll review this after the mayoral election because, again, they're not dropping it because he's innocent. They're dropping it because they felt it was election interference. So if he is reelected or if he's not, one effect of this is to sort of keep Eric Adams in line because, hey, we're going to review this case later this year, Eric Adams. FYI, Eric Adams. The Justice Department will look at this later this year to make sure you're sort of, they didn't say this, but behaving.
Okay, from CNBC, despite the fact that the Super Bowl was a massive blowout, Americans tuned in and made Sunday's game the most watched Super Bowl ever. The NFL's championship game attracted a record 127.7 million viewers on Sunday. That's according to Nielsen. The supersized live audience was of most importance to the advertisers that shelled out big bucks to have their brands featured during the big game. Advertising execs say it's rare that programming on live TV attracts such a big audience in one sitting, which makes that hefty price tag worth it. This year, some brands spent up to $8 million for a spot during the game. Sunday's Super Bowl aired on Fox's broadcast network, as well as its Spanish language cable network and NBC Universal's Telemundo.
So as we had told you late last week, last year they had 123 million viewers. So up a tick, up several percentage points over last year. Apparently, they broke another record on Sunday in terms of how many people streamed the game. Tubi had nearly 14 million viewers. It was also the first time the Super Bowl was available on an app. As for when the Super Bowl peaked, between 8 and 8:15 p.m., so this was during the second quarter, the halftime show, and they can track this minute by minute. The Kendrick Lamar halftime show actually had 134 million viewers, so it went up, and so they kind of run the number across the entire game, which is how you get to the 127 million number. But the halftime show there, pretty significant. Jill, if there's anyone at any of these companies that spent $8 million on an ad, the people who made the buying decision are probably sending around this article today saying, listen, it was worth it.
From CNN, the FBI has discovered about 2,400 new records related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy from a new records search. It follows an executive order from President Trump. The FBI said in a statement that it performed this new search of records following Trump's January 23rd executive order, which directed the release of more documents related to the assassinations of JFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Martin Luther King Jr. The Bureau said the search resulted in approximately 2,400 newly inventoried and digitized records that were previously unrecognized as related to the JFK assassination case file. But what everyone wants to know, what do they say? At this point, there is no additional information about what is in these records.
Yeah, so we're going to wait to hear what is potentially in these records. Remember, we told you about the executive order Trump signed that effectively gave the government 45 days to come back to him with a plan on how to release the remaining JFK documents, as well as those about RFK and MLK, all those various assassinations from the 1960s. That 45 days comes up in early March there, Jill. So stay tuned in the next few weeks for whether they meet that deadline and then what he does next with that information and with that plan to release documents. The FBI says it can now more quickly comb through and find records as a result of a new inventory and record keeping process. They have, look at all these records. So unclear as to what's in these records. Keep in mind, when it comes to JFK's assassination, as we told you, 99% of the records have been declassified and released so far. There's just a few hundred of them still that haven't been released. What they say is the subject for a lot of mystery. The experts who study this stuff say, listen, what it's probably going to show is that the CIA was tracking Lee Harvey Oswald. It's basically not going to say that the government or LBJ, the vice president, killed JFK on purpose. It's going to basically just be embarrassing information that they should have known what was coming. Sort of like the 9/11 documents that, certain people were tracing certain things but couldn't put the whole event together, the whole terror attack plot together. And that's the sense here, is that they should have known, but they couldn't put the puzzle pieces together. At least that's what I've been told. I'll wait for the docs to come out.
Sources tell Mo News.
Sources who study this stuff, who've written books about this stuff. That's what they tell us.
From Fortune, as Americans start to wrap their minds around where to go this summer, an entire continent is falling down the priority list. We're looking at you, Europe.
Wah, wah.
Data from the European Travel Commission shows that the share of U.S. travelers who are planning a European vacation has dropped from 45% in 2024 to 37% in 2025. That is the lowest level since 2021. The main factor that is sinking Americans' interest. And the second deterrent is a preference for domestic travel. So if these responses are a good indicator of Americans' travel behavior, European tourism boards can expect at least 500,000 fewer inbound visits over the course of the summer. And that's going to hurt. Or some people may like it, depending on whether or not you're in the tourism business.
Yeah, there have been certain cities where there have been protests because there's just too many tourists. But keep in mind, if you're in Europe and you depend on tourism, you know that Americans tend to spend more money than any other tourists. And when you look at the countries Americans most go to, well, what's the top of the list? Mexico, Canada. But then, as you go through the top 10 there, you got the UK, you got France, and you got Italy. But the costs are just getting, preposterous. Jill, post-COVID, as we were all pent up and ready to travel, I've been hearing from folks, especially in Italy, who are just like throwing out prices out there just to see if people will pay them. And they're like, yep, that Airbnb is sold out for the summer. So they keep raising the prices. Well, it turns out that Americans, or at least a certain number of Americans, are like, I'm not willing to pay that anymore. Where else can I go, either domestically or sort of the lesser traveled places? Now, people have dreams of going to the Parises and the Romes and the Venices and the Barcelonas of the world. But at the same time, the prices have just gotten to be too much here. And I should say, not just for Americans, for some Europeans, there's like an internal war happening in some of these places. Lisbon, Portugal, for instance, where because of American tourists and other tourists, people, instead of renting apartments to locals, they're raising the price, making them Airbnbs and renting them to tourists, which is then leading to locals who need to work in a city like Lisbon, Portugal, to have to live far outside the city to find affordable housing. So there's a sort of internal war in some of these places on Airbnb. So this tourism surge that has led to incredible economic numbers and growth in places like Spain, the aforementioned Portugal, Italy. At some point, it appears, the certain cost is too much. So we'll watch those numbers. Notably, one population of tourists that don't mind this, or at least still intend to travel to Europe, according to surveys, Chinese tourists. Tend to go to Europe. But again, the data shows that American tourists tend to spend much more. And so, there might be a leveling out if Americans decide to go somewhere else with their passport this summer.
And finally, from CNN, it's going to be harder to find sweet deals on chocolate this Valentine's Day. In fact, the cost of chocolate might put a bitter taste in your mouth.
That's just the dark chocolate. Right.
Industry experts say prices for chocolate increased about 10 to 20% over last year. It comes as the price of cocoa has more than doubled since the beginning of 2024. Years of bad weather in the key cocoa producing region of West Africa and the cocoa swollen shoot virus disease have hampered production. In the last 2 years, the cost of manufacturing chocolate has also increased by more than 167%. In a report last year, Swiss chocolate brand Lindt said it was a challenging year characterized by record high cocoa costs, substantial price increases, and weakened consumer sentiment. The company said it raised its prices and expects that trend to continue in 2025.
So the good folks over at Hershey say that they buy their cocoa a year in advance. So the cost at the store this year for Hershey chocolate, they say, will not reflect today's cocoa prices. They note a 1 pound bar of Hershey's chocolate costs $14.99. Jill, when's the last time you bought a 1 pound bar of Hershey's chocolate? I feel like that's a s'mores thing, but I'm not buying a plain Hershey bar typically.
Maybe for s'mores. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's like s'mores. That's what you go with. Otherwise, you got to get the almonds in there. You got to mix it up a little bit. Over at Mondelez, which owns Cadbury and Toblerone, they note an unprecedented cocoa cost inflation in their latest earnings report. And apparently, you can skirt higher prices by buying chocolate made with cocoa powder as opposed to cocoa. But, cocoa.
Come on, if I'm going to eat chocolate.
Yeah, you got to go with the real thing. Got to go with the real thing. Cocoa futures, those who trade cocoa, have noted that they're up 143% in the last year. Traders are literally doing what the band Toto once sang about. They're watching the rain down in Africa. Literally the quote here from one of them: every time we get rain in West Africa, the futures change. People are watching it that close. It's just crazy. There's a lot of money on the table in this exchange. So we got to watch the rains down in Africa for what's down in Africa. And to figure out, if you're interested in this subject matter, if you're what did you say, a cocoa industry expert, watching this stuff close. For those of you looking for more information on this, Ivory Coast and Ghana produce 70% of all cocoa. Over the years, though, the production in the West African countries has become less reliable due to this unpredictable weather, climate change, disease that is leaving opportunities for other countries, including Ecuador, to get involved in cocoa production here. A caveat, though, for those of you interested in cocoa production, which again needs a unique climate that we don't have here in the U.S., for the most part, it takes 4 to 6 years to harvest a cocoa tree after it's been planted. So it's a long-term, decade-long investment there, which is why you need good seasons year on year, because you're not harvesting that for like 6 years.
Well, with global warming, you never know. New York could become like the chocolate capital of the country. We'll see.
The jungle in a couple hundred years in New York. Jill, that's a long time in coming. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. Honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln, born on this day 216 years ago. He didn't know at that point that his face would be on the penny and that the penny would be going away. On this day in 1909, the NAACP was founded. It is one of the oldest and most influential civil rights organizations in the U.S. On this day in 1912, the last emperor of China, the boy emperor, Puyi, was forced to abdicate. He actually became emperor at the age of 2 and then was forced to abdicate at the age of 6. Challenging time for that toddler king. He apparently was able to come back for a few weeks at the age of 11. But anyway, the last emperor of China. I feel like I if there's not a Netflix special about him, I feel like I should write like a screenplay or something about Puyi, the boy emperor. He happened to be the last emperor after 2,000 years of emperors.
I'm just thinking of my son, who's 2.5, being the emperor of anything, and it's like it's unimaginable.
The emperor of the house. China. Your son would be effectively running the country, and you as the emperor's mother would play a role, but like he technically is in charge.
I mean, he is technically in charge of this house, so I guess
he is the boy emperor. You have a boy emperor at home. He might have to abdicate in a few years when mom takes control again. All right, a bit of music headlines on this day. Turning 101 years old today, one of my favorites, George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. It's among Gershwin's best-known compositions, one of the most popular pieces in the American jazz songbook. Jill, I played this. I played piano for a number of years as a kid. Gershwin was one of my faves. Some of you might be familiar. You remember those United Airlines ads from back in the day? Rhapsody in Blue. Speaking of ads, on this day 54 years ago, in 1971, the Coca-Cola jingle, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke," began airing on radio stations in the United States. It was a hit song. It was adapted by the ad agency McCann Erickson of the Mad Men era ad agencies. It was actually, at the time, the most expensive commercial made in history, and it actually plays a key role there in the final season of Mad Men, if you haven't seen it by now.
I think Mad Men is my favorite series of all time. It's a bold statement, but I stand by it.
That's a bold strategy, Cotton. It's from Dodgeball.
Oh, yeah, I've never seen it. Is that all we've got, Moshe? We're done.
Jill, I feel like we laughed, we cried.
We did a lot. A lot happened in this podcast. Okay, thank you guys for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and write us something nice, a nice review in the App Store. We really appreciate it, and it truly helps us grow our audience.
Yeah, we appreciate the 5-star reviews, especially over on the Apple podcast app, if you can do it. And a reminder again for On This Day in History, if there's an upcoming date in the next few weeks where you know that something significant happened in history, please send it along to us. info@mo.news is the email, info@mo.news. We're taking requests as we try to change things up for On This Day in History.
Okay, thanks, guys.